Most people think their problem with money is a lack of knowledge. They believe that if they just knew more about investing, budgeting, side hustles, or systems, everything would finally click. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If knowledge worked the way people think it does, then the smartest people would be the richest. And that's clearly not what we see. Some of the most intelligent people you know are still financially anxious, still stuck in the same cycles, still telling themselves they'll start soon. This isn't because they're lazy, and it's not because they're irresponsible. It's because knowing is not the same as choosing. We like to believe that once we understand something, our behavior will automatically follow. But human behavior doesn't work that way. If it did, no one would smoke after learning it causes cancer. No one would overspend after seeing their bank balance. And no one would stay in financial patterns they already know are hurting them. Yet they do. Because information doesn't move people. Emotion does. And for smart people, information often becomes a hiding place. They read one more book, watch one more video, listen to one more explanation. Not because they're preparing, but because preparation feels safer than action. Thinking feels productive, but it isn't the same as moving. Here's where things get interesting. The smarter you are, the better you are at explaining delay. You don't say, "I'm afraid." You say, "I'm still analyzing." You don't say, "I don't want to risk failing." You say, "The timing isn't right." You don't say, "I'm avoiding discomfort." You say, "I want to be strategic." And because these explanations sound intelligent, they go unquestioned. This is how smart people stay stuck without ever feeling stuck. They confuse clarity with progress. They confuse understanding with momentum. They confuse planning with commitment. But behavior doesn't change when something makes sense. Behavior changes when something feels more painful to avoid than to face. That's why comfort is so dangerous. Comfort doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, "You're not failing, you're just not ready yet." And smart people believe it. Because comfort doesn't feel like a threat. It feels reasonable. By the time you realize what it cost you, years have already passed. This is the first illusion we need to break. Your problem is not that you don't know enough. Your problem is that knowledge has become a substitute for action. And as long as thinking feels like progress, real progress will always feel unnecessary. In the next part, we'll talk about why discipline feels boring, why motivation keeps failing, and why the behaviors that build wealth don't feel impressive at all.
You don't stay stuck because you're incapable. You stay stuck because you're comfortable. And comfort is quiet. It doesn't scream. It doesn't panic. It whispers. It tells you, this is fine. You're paying your bills. You're not drowning. You're not in crisis. So nothing feels urgent. And without urgency, nothing changes. Smart people especially fall into this trap. Because when you're intelligent, you can explain away discomfort. You can justify delay. You can rationalize hesitation. You can defend your inaction with logic. You don't say, "I'm afraid." You say, "I'm being strategic." You don't say, "I don't want to risk it." You say, "I need more information first." And that sounds responsible. But underneath it, something else is happening. You are protecting your identity. Because as long as you're planning, you don't have to confront the possibility of failure. As long as you're researching, you don't have to test yourself in reality. Planning keeps your self-image safe. Action puts it at risk. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Smart people often fear looking foolish more than they desire getting ahead. So they wait, they optimize, they refine, they prepare, but they don't move. Meanwhile, someone less prepared, less informed, and less analytical takes imperfect action and wins. Not because they're smarter, but because they were willing to look stupid. Money does not reward potential, it rewards behavior. And behavior is emotional. You don't invest because you understand compounding. You invest because you can tolerate uncertainty. You don't build a business because you read the right books. You build it because you can endure rejection. You don't save consistently because you know it's wise. You save because you can delay gratification. And none of those are intelligence problems. They are emotional regulation problems. This is where most smart people miscalculate. They assume that knowing the math is enough. They assume that understanding the strategy guarantees execution. But execution requires discomfort, and discomfort is exactly what intelligence tries to avoid. Because when you're smart, you're used to being right. You're used to understanding things quickly. You're used to competence. Money growth, however, forces you into beginner territory. It forces you to be uncertain, to be exposed, to make imperfect decisions. And that feels threatening to someone whose identity is built on intelligence. So instead of risking small embarrassment today, you accept slow stagnation over years. And stagnation feels safe until you look back and realize nothing has moved. 5 years passed, 10 years passed, and your income barely changed. Not because you didn't know better, but because you never allowed yourself to feel worse in the short term. Comfort is seductive. It convinces you that steady is safe, but sometimes steady is just stuck. The hardest realization for intelligent people is this: your mind can be your greatest asset or your most sophisticated excuse. And until you learn to act despite uncertainty, your intelligence will continue protecting you from growth. That's not a money problem, that's a courage problem. And courage is not loud, it's not dramatic, it's simply choosing movement when thinking would be easier.
If knowledge isn't enough and comfort keeps you stuck, then the real question becomes simple. What actually changes behavior? Not inspiration, not motivation, not another breakthrough insight. Because if motivation worked, you would have already changed. You felt motivated before. You've had clarity before. You've promised yourself before. And yet the pattern returned. That's because behavior doesn't change when something feels powerful. It changes when something becomes structured. Structure is boring. Structure doesn't give you a rush. Structure doesn't make you feel inspired. It simply removes the need to decide again tomorrow. Most people lose with money not because they made one terrible decision, but because they made 1,000 flexible ones. They renegotiated their standards. They adjusted their limits. They reopened decisions that should have been permanent. Every time you reopen a decision, emotion gets another vote. And emotion rarely votes for discipline. This is why the people who win financially often look rigid. They automate savings. They fix investment rules. They cap lifestyle increases. They remove choice from areas where they know they are weak. That's not restriction, that's protection. Protection from the version of themselves that shows up when stress hits. Because stress is predictable. Fatigue is predictable. Doubt is predictable. Your emotional dips are not surprises. So building a system that assumes you will sometimes feel weak is not pessimism, it's maturity. Smart people resist this because structure feels beneath them. They want nuance. They want optimization. They want flexibility. But flexibility is where discipline dissolves. The wealthy are rarely impressive day to day. They don't wake up excited to save. They don't feel heroic investing consistently. They don't celebrate avoiding unnecessary expenses. They just repeat it. Over and over. Until repetition becomes identity. This is where transformation actually happens. Not when you feel different, but when you behave differently long enough that it stops feeling forced. Identity follows behavior, not the other way around. You don't become disciplined and then act disciplined. You act disciplined long enough that discipline becomes who you are. That is slow. That is boring. That is invisible at first. Which is why most people abandon it. They expect momentum to feel dramatic. But real momentum feels almost uneventful. It's small increases. Small deposits. Small improvements in decision-making. Compounding is not exciting in the moment. It is only impressive in hindsight. 5 years later, people call it discipline. 10 years later, they call it wisdom. But in the beginning, it just looked repetitive. This is why getting rich is boring isn't an insult, it's a warning. If you're chasing excitement, you will abandon the very behaviors that create stability. If you're chasing validation, you will avoid the quiet work that builds capacity. The real shift happens when you stop asking what feels right today and start asking what reduces future regret. That question changes everything. Because regret accumulates slowly, just like wealth. You don't notice regret building while you're comfortable. You notice it when time exposes the gap between who you could have been and who you became. And that gap is rarely caused by ignorance, it's caused by delay. So the real discipline is not about money, it's about honesty. Honesty about your patterns. Honesty about your excuses. Honesty about the fact that intelligence alone will not carry you. Structure will. And structure feels small at first. But small decisions made consistently become outcomes you can't ignore. If you want different results, stop searching for stronger motivation. Design stronger systems. Because the version of you that succeeds financially is not smarter than you. They are simply less negotiable.